that had risen to dominance through a combination of raw power, advanced technology, and an unwavering belief in their own superiority. Standing over 7 feet tall, with muscular, reptilian bodies covered in thick, scaled armor, the Vraks were built for war. Their eyes, cold and predatory, gleamed with the intelligence of seasoned hunters, and their sharp, serrated teeth were a constant reminder of their carnivorous nature. Every aspect of their physiology was designed to instill fear, and for countless civilizations, the sight of a Vraks warship on the horizon meant one thing: the end. Vraks society was built on the principles of strength and dominance. From the moment they were born, Vraks were taught that they were the ultimate life form, destined to rule over all others. Their culture revered the art of combat, and every Vraks warrior was trained from a young age in the use of their advanced weaponry and hand-to-hand combat. They viewed mercy as a weakness and compassion as a flaw, believing that the strong were meant to conquer and the weak to serve. Technologically, the Vraks were unmatched. Their warships were massive, heavily armed behemoths that could devastate entire planets. Their soldiers were equipped with energy weapons that could vaporize enemies in an instant, and their armor was virtually impenetrable, capable of withstanding even the most advanced countermeasures. The Vraks also possessed advanced AI systems that assisted in both strategy and battlefield tactics, allowing them to outmaneuver and outthink their opponents at every turn. It was this combination of brute force and technological superiority that had allowed the Vraks to subjugate or annihilate every species they had encountered. The history of the Vraks was one of relentless conquest. Over the centuries, they had expanded their empire across the galaxy, leaving a trail of destruction in their wake. Entire civilizations had been wiped out, their planets left barren and lifeless after the Vraks had taken what they wanted. Those who were spared were enslaved, forced to labor under the harsh rule of their new masters. Resistance was futile. Any species that dared to stand against the Vraks was swiftly crushed, their defiance erased from history. The Vraks thrived on the fear they instilled in others, and their reputation as the ultimate predators was well earned. It was in this context of dominance that the Vraks began to seek new challenges. Having conquered the known galaxy, they grew restless, eager for fresh prey to test their mettle against. They scoured the stars for new worlds to conquer, new species to subjugate. It was during this search that they discovered humanity, a relatively unknown species on the fringes of the galaxy. To the Vraks, humans appeared weak and unremarkable, a primitive species that had only just begun to explore the cosmos. Their technology, while advanced by their own standards, was laughably inferior to that of the Vraks. Their society, divided by borders and ideologies, seemed ripe for conquest. The Vraks saw humanity as nothing more than another easy victory, another notch in their belt of galactic dominance. Confident in their superiority, the Vraks made the decision to target Earth, the human homeworld. It was to be their next great conquest, a demonstration of their unchallenged power. The Vraks' leadership, sitting in their grand war chambers, planned the invasion with the same meticulous detail that had secured their previous victories. They anticipated little resistance. After all, what could a species as insignificant as humanity do against the might of the Vraks? The outcome, they believed, was already decided. However, as the Vraks prepared for their latest conquest, there were whispers among the few who had studied humanity more closely. These voices, though few and far between, suggested that humans might not be as weak as they seemed. There were stories, rumors really, of human resilience, of their ability to adapt and overcome even the most daunting challenges. Some pointed to humanity's history of survival, their triumphs over natural disasters, wars, and internal strife. But these concerns were dismissed by the Vraks' leadership, who saw them as nothing more than the fears of the timid. The Vraks were predators, and predators did not fear their prey. And so, the stage was set. The Vraks prepared to launch their invasion, confident in the knowledge that they would soon add humanity to their list of conquests. But as their warships gathered on the edge of human space, there was a growing sense of anticipation, an unspoken question that lingered in the air. What if, just this once, the Vraks had miscalculated? What if humanity was not the easy prey they appeared to be? The Vraks had never known fear, but as they prepared to face humanity, a new, unfamiliar sensation began to take root in the hearts of their leaders, a sensation that, if they had recognized it, might have given them pause. The Vrax invasion of Earth began with the precision and confidence that had marked all their previous conquests. Their fleet, a massive armada of warships bristling with advanced weaponry, arrived in Earth's orbit with an almost casual arrogance. The Vrax commanders viewed this mission as routine, another easy victory in a long line of conquests. Their ships, each one capable of obliterating entire cities with a single barrage, positioned themselves above key locations on the planet's surface, major cities, military installations, and communication hubs. They intended to decapitate humanity's ability to respond before the battle had even begun. The first salvo was devastating. Vrax weapons, far beyond anything humanity had ever encountered, rained down on Earth with terrifying force. Entire city blocks were vaporized in an instant, and military bases that had stood for decades were reduced to rubble in moments. The Vrax believed they were witnessing the beginning of the end for humanity. To them, this was merely the prelude to the inevitable capitulation that would follow. After all, every other species they had encountered had crumbled in the face of such overwhelming power. But Earth was different. Humanity, though caught off guard, did not respond with the panic and chaos the Vrax had expected. Instead, they moved with a speed and coordination that surprised even the most seasoned Vrax commanders. Within hours of the first attack, human military forces were mobilizing across the globe. Communications, though disrupted, were quickly restored through secondary and even tertiary networks. Emergency protocols that had been drilled into the populace for decades sprang into action, and civilian volunteers flooded into shelters, ready to support the defense efforts in any way they could. The early skirmishes between the Vrax and human forces were brutal. The Vrax's technological superiority was undeniable. Human aircraft were shot down before they could even engage, and ground forces were obliterated by energy weapons that seemed almost supernatural in their destructive power. The Vrax believed they were seeing the end of human resistance. But then something unexpected happened. The humans adapted. As the Vrax continued their assault, they began to encounter resistance in forms they hadn't anticipated. Human forces, realizing they couldn't match the Vrax in direct confrontations, shifted their tactics. They abandoned conventional warfare and embraced guerrilla tactics, using the terrain, weather, and urban environments to their advantage. Small, highly mobile units began to strike at Vrax supply lines, ambush their patrols, and sabotage their equipment. In the dense forests, mountain ranges, and sprawling urban centers, human soldiers became ghosts, striking quickly and then disappearing before the Vrax could retaliate. The Vrax, used to overwhelming their enemies with sheer force, found themselves facing an enemy they couldn't easily target. Their advanced sensors were often confused by the environment, and their superior firepower was rendered less effective against an opponent that refused to engage in a straightforward battle. The Vrax began to suffer losses, not large enough to turn the tide of the war, but significant enough to sow the first seeds of doubt among their commanders. In one particular engagement, a Vrax battalion found itself lured into a dense urban area where their advanced technology became a liability. The humans had booby-trapped the entire sector, and as the Vrax advanced, they triggered a series of explosions that decimated their ranks. Those who survived the initial blasts were picked off by snipers hidden in the rubble. The Vrax, for the first time, experienced the sting of a well-executed ambush. It was a shock to their system. This was not the easy prey they had been led to believe. As the days turned into weeks, the Vrax began to realize that humanity was unlike any species they had encountered before. The humans were relentless in their resistance, refusing to surrender even as the destruction around them mounted. They displayed a resourcefulness and determination that the Vrax had never seen. Every time the Vrax thought they had crushed the human defense, another counterattack would spring up, seemingly out of nowhere. The Vrax commanders, who had once spoken of Earth's conquest with smug certainty, now found themselves issuing increasingly desperate orders. The Vrax had severely underestimated humanity. They had expected a quick, decisive victory, but what they found was a species that fought with a tenacity born of survival instincts honed over millennia. The humans had turned their own planet into a battlefield that even the Vraks, with all their technology, found difficult to navigate. The Vraks were beginning to experience something new: frustration. And with it, the first inklings of fear. The early stages of the invasion had not gone as planned. The Vraks' confidence began to waver as they realized they were facing an enemy that could adapt and evolve faster than they had anticipated. The humans, once considered an easy target, were proving to be a formidable opponent. Humanity's ability to adapt became the cornerstone of their defense as the conflict with the Vraks intensified. In the early stages of the invasion, humans were forced to endure staggering losses, but they quickly learned from their encounters. What the Vraks had mistaken for a lack of strength was actually a hidden resilience, born from centuries of surviving on a planet filled with natural disasters, conflicts, and adversity. As the Vraks pressed their assault, human strategists began to notice patterns in their enemies' tactics and identified vulnerabilities that could be exploited. The Vraks, for all their technological superiority, were rigid in their approach to warfare. They relied on brute force and direct confrontation, tactics that had served them well against less resourceful foes. But Earth's diverse terrain, unpredictable weather, and densely populated urban environments proved to be a challenge they had not anticipated. Human forces, recognizing this, began to craft strategies that played to these strengths. They utilized the dense forests, mountain ranges, and sprawling cities to create traps that would lure Vraks units into vulnerable positions. In the mountains, human soldiers used the rugged landscape to their advantage, setting up ambushes that left Vraks patrols decimated. In the cities, the concrete jungles became a battlefield where small, agile units of humans could strike quickly and then disappear, leaving the heavily armored Vraks forces struggling to keep up. Even the weather became a tool of war. Storms that the Vraks had dismissed as mere inconveniences were used by human forces to mask their movements and launch surprise attacks. This adaptability was coupled with a level of cunning that the Vraks had not expected. Human commanders, drawing from centuries of warfare experience, began to implement unconventional tactics. They staged feints to draw Vraks forces into predetermined kill zones, disrupted supply lines with targeted strikes, and used misinformation to sow confusion among the Vraks' ranks. Guerrilla warfare, sabotage, and psychological tactics became the hallmarks of humanity's resistance, turning what the Vraks had expected to be a straightforward campaign into a quagmire. But it wasn't just strategy that defined humanity's fight back, it was the unwavering determination to survive. Stories of individual bravery and sacrifice began to emerge from the battlefield, each one a testament to humanity's resolve. Soldiers who willingly held the line against overwhelming odds to buy time for their comrades, civilians who risked their lives to sabotage Vraks' equipment, and entire communities that refused to submit, choosing instead to fight to the last person. These acts of heroism weren't isolated incidents. They were the heartbeat of a global resistance that refused to be extinguished. The Vraks, who had long believed in their own invincibility, began to experience something they had never felt before: fear. Their initial confidence was eroded by each unexpected defeat, each ambush that left their forces in disarray. Reports of human tactics spread through the Vraks' ranks, causing confusion and lowering morale. The rigid structure of Vraks' command, which had always emphasized discipline and obedience, began to crack under the strain of continuous, unrelenting human attacks. The turning point in the conflict came with a battle that would be remembered as the first major defeat for the Vraks on Earth. A heavily fortified Vrak stronghold, strategically placed to control a crucial supply route, became the target of a coordinated human assault. The attack was a masterclass in tactical brilliance. Human forces, having studied the stronghold's defenses, executed a series of maneuvers that isolated the Vrak's garrison and cut off their reinforcements. Using a combination of sabotage, diversion, and direct assault, the humans managed to breach the stronghold's defenses and destroy it from within. The destruction of the stronghold sent shockwaves through the Vrak's ranks. For the first time in their history of conquest, they had suffered a defeat that could not be easily dismissed. The Vrak's commanders, who had once viewed humanity as nothing more than prey, were forced to confront the reality that they were now facing a formidable enemy. The humans had not only survived the initial onslaught, but had begun to push back with a ferocity that the Vrax had never encountered. This defeat marked a shift in the Vrax's approach. The overconfidence that had characterized their invasion was replaced with caution. The Vrax commanders began to question their tactics and the effectiveness of their overwhelming force strategy. They had underestimated humanity's capacity for adaptation, and now they were paying the price. The Vrax, for the first time, found themselves on the defensive, forced to regroup and reconsider their options in the face of a growing human threat. As the Vrax retreated to reassess their strategy, the humans pressed their advantage, refusing to give the enemy a moment's respite. What had begun as a desperate defense had transformed into a counteroffensive that was pushing the Vrax back. The balance of power was shifting, and with it, the nature of the conflict. The Vrax, once the undisputed predators of the galaxy, were now coming to understand that they were not invincible. They were facing a species that was not only willing to fight but was capable of winning. This realization brought with it a new level of fear and uncertainty among the Vrax. The very thought that they could be defeated, that the prey could become the predator, was a concept that shook the foundations of their society. The Vrax, now facing the unthinkable possibility of defeat, began to resort to increasingly brutal tactics in a desperate attempt to crush humanity's resistance. The calculated precision that had characterized their initial invasion gave way to a strategy born of fear and frustration. The Vrax, once so confident in their superiority, now saw no other option but to break humanity's spirit through sheer devastation. They unleashed their most powerful weapons, turning entire cities into smoldering ruins. Scorched earth tactics were employed with ruthless efficiency, leaving behind a trail of destruction intended to demoralize the human population. The Vrax targeted civilian populations with cold-blooded intent, believing that by inflicting maximum suffering, they could force humanity into submission. Hospitals, schools, and shelters, places that had once been considered off-limits in conventional warfare, became primary targets. The Vrax sought to strip humanity of any hope, to instill a level of fear so profound that resistance would seem futile. It was a strategy that had worked countless times before, crushing the will of lesser species. But humanity was different. Instead of breaking, humanity's resolve only hardened. The brutal tactics employed by the Vrax did not sow fear, they ignited a fire of defiance. The global population, witnessing the atrocities committed by their enemy, united as never before. Factions that had once been divided by politics, ideology, or geography came together with a singular purpose: to defend their home and drive the invaders from their planet. The Vrax had underestimated the depth of human resilience, and now they were facing a force that grew stronger with every atrocity committed against it. The more the Vrax tried to break humanity's spirit, the more they fueled the determination of their adversary. Resistance cells formed in every corner of the globe, from the remnants of devastated cities to the most remote rural areas. Where the Vrax expected surrender, they found only greater resistance. Communities that had once been disparate were now united by a common cause, their collective strength becoming a force the Vrax had not anticipated. In response to the Vrax's increasingly brutal tactics, humanity began to employ psychological warfare to further demoralize their enemy. Propaganda campaigns were launched, spreading messages of human resilience and the inevitability of Vrax defeat. Sabotage operations targeted Vrax supply lines and communications, creating confusion and chaos within their ranks. Misinformation was fed into the Vrax command structure, leading them to doubt their own strategies and question the loyalty of their subordinates. The predators, who had once believed themselves invincible, now found themselves plagued by paranoia and distrust. These psychological tactics took a heavy toll on the Vrax. The cracks that had begun to appear in their command structure widened into chasms. Once a well-oiled machine of conquest, the Vrax war effort began to falter under the weight of internal dissent and the relentless pressure from human forces. The Vrax, who had always been the hunters, now found themselves in an unfamiliar position. They were being hunted, not just physically, but mentally. The confidence that had once been their greatest strength was now eroding, replaced by a growing fear that they might actually lose this war. The conflict reached its climax in a final, massive battle that would determine the fate of Earth. The Vrax, sensing that they were on the brink of failure, threw everything they had into this last-ditch effort. Their fleet, battered but still formidable, descended upon Earth with a ferocity born of desperation. Every available Vrak soldier was deployed, and their most powerful weapons were unleashed in a bid to crush humanity once and for all. It was a battle of unparalleled scale, with the very survival of both sides hanging in the balance. But humanity, forged in the crucible of war and driven by a relentless will to survive, met the Vraks with a unity and strategy that belied the odds. The lessons learned throughout the conflict were brought to bear in this final stand. Human forces, though outnumbered and outgunned, used every advantage they had: terrain, weather, and the indomitable spirit of their people. They struck with precision, targeting Vraks' vulnerabilities with surgical accuracy. Where the Vraks expected chaos, they found coordination; where they anticipated fear, they encountered unwavering courage. As the battle raged on, it became clear that the Vraks were not fighting just against human technology or military might. They were fighting against the very essence of human survival. Every inch of ground was contested with a ferocity that took the Vraks by surprise. The humans, who had been underestimated from the start, now proved that their greatest weapon was not in their machines, but in their spirit. They fought not just for victory, but for the right to exist on their own terms. In the end, the Vraks, despite their overwhelming force, could not break the human will. The turning point came when a critical Vraks flagship, the linchpin of their assault, was destroyed in a coordinated human attack that combined air, land, and cyber warfare. This loss shattered the Vraks' command structure and sent shockwaves through their ranks. The once cohesive invasion force descended into chaos, with commanders issuing conflicting orders and soldiers retreating in disarray. The defeat was decisive. The Vraks, unable to sustain their assault and facing the collapse of their forces, were forced to retreat. Earth, battered and scarred by the conflict, had held the line. Humanity, through sheer determination and unity, had achieved what many thought impossible. They had repelled the galaxy's most feared predators and defended their home. As the Vraks retreated, the significance of their defeat became clear. The predators, who had feared no one, now knew fear themselves. The Vraks were left to contemplate the consequences of their hubris, while humanity emerged from the conflict forever changed. The Vraks' retreat from Earth was a scene of utter humiliation. Their once mighty fleet, which had descended upon the planet with overwhelming confidence, now limped away, battered and broken. The Vraks, who had prided themselves on being the galaxy's ultimate predators, were forced to confront a harsh reality. They had been defeated by a species they had grossly underestimated. The retreat was not just a military withdrawal, it was a retreat from the very identity that had defined the Vraks for millennia. Their pride was shattered, and their reputation as the galaxy's most feared conquerors lay in ruins. As the Vraks' ships disappeared into the void, the enormity of their defeat began to ripple through the galaxy. Other species, who had lived in terror of the Vraks for generations, watched in awe as the seemingly invincible predators were driven back by a species that had once been considered insignificant. Humanity, through their unyielding resistance, had accomplished what no other species had dared to even attempt. The message was clear: the Vraks were not invincible, and humanity was not prey. With their victory, humanity earned a new place in the galaxy, a place of respect and recognition. Other civilizations, once oppressed by the Vraks or living in constant fear of their next attack, now looked to humanity as a symbol of hope. The humans, who had faced the galaxy's greatest predators and emerged victorious, became a beacon of resistance against tyranny. No longer seen as a mere backwater species, humanity was now recognized as a force to be reckoned with, a civilization that had proven its mettle in the most trying of circumstances. The impact of the defeat on the Vraks was profound. Their society, which had been united by the belief in their own superiority and the inevitability of their conquest, began to fracture. The first real defeat in their history shook the very foundations of Vraks culture. Factions emerged, each with different views on how to deal with the human threat. Some argued for a renewed and more ruthless assault, while others advocated for a more cautious approach, fearing that further confrontation with humanity could lead to even greater losses. The fear that the Vrax had once inspired in others now turned inward, causing instability within their ranks. The confidence that had once driven their conquests was replaced by doubt and paranoia. Leaders who had never questioned their methods or strategies now found themselves facing internal dissent and challenges to their authority. The Vrax, once a unified force of predatory power, were now grappling with the consequences of their hubris and the reality that they were not invincible. As the galaxy adjusted to this new reality, there was a sense of reflection on the conflict and its broader implications. The Vrax, who had believed that strength came solely from power and domination, were forced to learn a painful lesson. True strength, as demonstrated by humanity, was not just about military might, it was about the will to fight for survival, freedom, and the right to exist on one's own terms. The humans had shown that resilience, unity, and the refusal to be dominated were the ultimate forms of strength. Humanity's victory was not just a triumph of strategy or technology. It was a testament to the unbreakable spirit of a species that refused to surrender, even in the face of overwhelming odds. The conflict had changed the galaxy, challenging long-held assumptions about power and fear. The predators had been humbled, and the prey had risen to take their place among the stars. In the aftermath of the war, both the Vrax and humanity were left to navigate a galaxy that had been irrevocably altered by their conflict. The Vrax, once the embodiment of fear, now faced their own fears as they struggled to rebuild and redefine their place in the galaxy. Humanity, on the other hand, stepped into a new role as defenders of freedom, a role that came with its own challenges and responsibilities. The galaxy had entered a new era, one where the lines between predator and prey were no longer clear-cut. The conflict had shown that strength could be found in the most unexpected places, and that even the mightiest could be brought low by those they had underestimated. As the galaxy moved forward, the lessons of the war between the Vrax and humanity would serve as a reminder that true power lies not in the ability to dominate, but in the resilience to stand firm in the face of adversity. The Galactic Council chambers were packed, representatives from dozens of species filling the room with a tension so thick it seemed to pulse in the air. The usually composed and orderly council was in disarray, voices overlapping as members debated, questioned, and demanded answers. This wasn't an ordinary meeting. Today's session had been called in response to an unprecedented crisis. Humanity, the unpredictable species known for its strength and resilience, had flatly refused to negotiate. The refusal was simple, direct, but it carried implications that none could ignore. Humans had developed a reputation across the galaxy for their independence, a fierce commitment to self-reliance that bordered on arrogance. For years, the Council had tried to bring them into the fold, to pull humanity under the governance of galactic law, but every overture was met with polite dismissal or, more recently, blunt refusal. And now, this outright rejection was more than the Council could tolerate. In the center of the room, an elder member of the Council, representing a species known for diplomacy, raised a hand to call for silence. The commotion gradually died down, though tension remained visible in every posture, every wary glance. He cleared his throat, his voice steady but strained, as he spoke. "We have always believed that humanity would see the benefit of joining us, that they would understand the mutual advantage of cooperation. Yet they continue to stand alone, to dismiss our authority as if it were irrelevant." His words were met with murmurs of agreement, though a few council members shifted uneasily, sensing where this was headed. "Our peaceful efforts to integrate them into our system have failed. They defy us openly, without fear." A reptilian representative leaned forward, scales glistening under the dim lights. "Perhaps they think they're untouchable. They've been allowed too much freedom, and now they believe they're beyond control." His gaze swept the room, challenging the council with a look of disdain. "Is that what we are? A council that allows insolence and disregard?" Another member, her voice softer yet edged with an undercurrent of worry, interjected. "But humans are not like other species. They are unpredictable. They lack the reverence for tradition, for structure, that keeps our galaxy stable. We've all seen what they're capable of, how they've adapted to environments that would kill most of us. They thrive in chaos." The room grew silent again, as if each member were recalling a story, an incident where humans had shown their unique resilience, their capacity to turn survival into an art form. No species had ever wielded such adaptability. Humans had not only survived harsh conditions but seemed to embrace challenges that others deemed impossible. They didn't fit into the Council's carefully crafted order. They were something entirely different, something that couldn't be predicted or controlled. A representative from a race renowned for technological prowess spoke up, his tone laced with frustration. They reject our technology, our diplomacy, our laws. They choose to remain isolated, separate. What do they hope to gain by refusing us? They must realize they cannot stand against the entire Council. The confidence in his voice wavered, betrayed by the subtle crack that followed his words. But even as he spoke, a murmur of dissent rippled through a group in the back. An older representative from a smaller, less influential system shook his head slowly. They don't refuse out of arrogance. It's something deeper. Humans, they fear losing control of their fate. We misunderstand their actions because we project our values onto them. They're not rejecting us, they're safeguarding something we cannot see. This observation unsettled the room. It was one thing to see humanity's actions as mere defiance, but another to realize they might be driven by something fundamentally different, an outlook alien to the Council itself. The thought that humanity had its own motives, priorities that didn't align with the Council's vision, was a deeply uncomfortable one. Enough speculation, snapped a senior official. Their refusal destabilizes us all. We must not allow them to set a precedent for others to follow. We risk others seeing this defiance as a path to independence. His voice hardened. If we tolerate this, we invite rebellion. Order will dissolve. The fear was palpable. Humanity was a threat, not because of their strength alone, but because they were rewriting the rules of the galaxy with their very existence. It wasn't just a matter of rejecting the Council's authority. It was about the example they set. If they could exist outside the Council's influence, who else might try? The elder member raised his voice again, calling for calm. We have tried reason, logic, and diplomacy, and they have turned their backs on all of it. But we cannot afford to act rashly. Humans, for all their unpredictability, are not mindless aggressors. They act with purpose, and we must understand that purpose before we take any drastic measures. The suggestion of understanding humanity before acting sparked a hushed argument. Some nodded in agreement, recognizing the wisdom and patience. Others, however, felt the time for understanding had long passed. They wanted control, a way to remind humanity that independence was an illusion in a galaxy bound by shared laws. They must be shown that defiance has consequences. One representative muttered, his voice dripping with frustration. If they refuse to cooperate, they will find themselves alone against the will of the galaxy. In the back of the chamber, a quiet voice broke through the growing tension. And if they aren't afraid of that? The question hung in the air, cold and heavy. It was a possibility no one wanted to acknowledge, that humans might truly be willing to stand alone, unyielding in the face of all the Council's power. That they might value their autonomy more than any alliance, any protection the Council could offer. A long silence followed, as the Council members sat with this uncomfortable reality. Humanity's refusal to negotiate wasn't an oversight or a mistake. It was a deliberate act, a calculated statement that they would not be bound by the galaxy's rules. And the Council, for all its authority, was left grappling with a truth they had never considered: they could not make humans fear them. The session ended in uneasy silence, each member retreating to their own thoughts, questioning everything they thought they knew about power and control. For the first time, the Council felt the weight of their own limits, confronted by a force that couldn't be subdued with politics or pressure. In that chamber, as the representatives filed out, one thought remained, echoing in the silence left behind: humanity wasn't asking for permission. They were declaring their right to exist as they saw fit, and the Council could either accept it, or risk a confrontation they might not survive. Humanity's history was one the Council had watched with equal parts fascination and dread. They were newcomers to the galactic scene, arriving late compared to the ancient races that filled the Council seats. Yet their impact had been immediate, disruptive, a force that drew attention whether they sought it or not. A species so seemingly fragile, limited to a single solar system until recently, yet driven by a will that defied expectation. In their early years, humans hadn't sought alliances or protection. They hadn't begged for council endorsement or diplomatic ties. Instead, they pushed forward, expanding with a stubborn persistence, learning and adapting to harsh environments with a ferocity that left other species uneasy. While most species followed a predictable trajectory, exploration, settlement, and eventual dependence on council resources, humanity had done the opposite. They moved quickly, decisively, and they remained independent. Where others saw uncertainty, they found opportunity. Stories of human resilience became a topic of quiet discussion. Many council members had witnessed it firsthand. There were tales of humans surviving where they shouldn't have, enduring conditions that would break most species. Their adaptability was remarkable but unnerving. It wasn't just physical resilience, it was their minds, their drive to overcome odds, to make inhospitable worlds their own. They didn't necessity alone, they adapted because they thrived on it. One particular incident still lingered in council memory. An exploratory mission involving a human crew had gone terribly wrong on a distant, toxic planet. Radiation levels and extreme temperatures made survival impossible by council standards, and the recovery team had prepared to retrieve only remains. Yet when they arrived, they found the human crew alive, improvising equipment from ship debris, creating makeshift shelters. They had lasted far beyond projected survival times, their willpower almost palpable. When questioned, their leader had merely shrugged, saying, "Giving up wasn't an option." And that was the unsettling thing, this drive that refused defeat. It was a spirit, an unwillingness to bend that went beyond logic or biology. The Council's scientific minds had tried to study it, to pin down what made humans so different, but there was no simple answer. They were relentless, even reckless. They pushed boundaries and ignored warnings, sometimes succeeding, sometimes failing spectacularly, but never seeming to regret the risks. It was as if they existed in a state of constant motion, fueled by a deep-rooted belief that anything could be overcome if they tried hard enough. This reputation grew, and so did the Council's interest in humanity. At first, it had been curiosity, then concern. Attempts were made to contact them, to integrate them into the galactic community, as was customary for emerging species. But humanity's responses had been lukewarm, polite but distant. They listened, nodded, but continued on their own path, uninterested in the Council's offers of guidance or aid. Diplomats sent to Earth often returned baffled, unsure whether they'd been politely dismissed or simply ignored. Humanity's dismissal of Council systems and procedures was perplexing. Most civilizations, upon contact, eagerly accepted Council guidance, finding comfort in the order it provided. But humans seemed to see no value in it. The rules that formed the backbone of galactic society were, to them, barriers rather than assurances. Where others found stability, they saw restriction. This attitude unsettled the Council. An independent species was tolerable, but one that saw their authority as a limitation rather than a foundation was dangerous. Then came the incidents, skirmishes on disputed territories, misunderstandings that escalated into conflicts. Humanity's response was always quick, fierce, and without hesitation. They didn't wait for permission or council mediation, they acted as they saw fit. And each time, the Council saw a pattern emerging. Humans fought, but they didn't seek conquest. They defended, but they didn't provoke. It was as though they had one guiding principle: to be left alone. After each conflict, they issued the same message, a simple, unwavering request for autonomy, for the right to forge their own path without interference. The Council, which prided itself on diplomacy, found this bluntness both refreshing and troubling. Humans had no interest in diplomacy for diplomacy's sake. They viewed it as a means to an end, nothing more. And if the end was unclear or unhelpful, they discarded it without a second thought. Several Council members tried to make sense of this pattern, to understand the roots of humanity's defiance. They dug into human history, analyzing their culture, their wars, their conflicts. What they found was a legacy of independence, a tendency to resist control with a ferocity that bordered on obsession. Humans had a long history of breaking free from domination, of revolutions, of uprisings. Control seemed to be anathema to them, an unacceptable violation of something they held sacred. To the Council, this realization was more unsettling than any display of strength or military prowess. Humanity wasn't simply strong, they were unyielding. Their sense of self was so deeply rooted that they would sooner face destruction than submission. No matter how many times the Council tried to approach them with offers of unity, of shared resources and protection, humans only became more withdrawn, more insistent on setting their own terms. The Council's frustration grew to a lack of diplomatic finesse. It was a stance, a fundamental belief that their way of life would not be compromised. They wanted no part of the Council's oversight, no part of the structured alliances that held the galaxy together. To them, it was a cage. And it was this that the Council couldn't comprehend. To question the Council was one thing, but to openly defy the very concept of galactic unity was heresy. This defiance left the Council with a choice they hadn't anticipated. Humanity was a force that wouldn't be persuaded, and every attempt to sway them had only solidified their resolve. They were unlike any other species the Council had encountered, not because of their strength or resources, but because of an immovable will that rejected any authority outside their own. As the Council debated, voices grew louder, more desperate. Some wanted to punish humanity, to make an example of them. Others feared that such an action would only provoke them, risking a conflict they might not win. Humanity's unpredictability, their refusal to act by any rulebook, made every calculation fraught with risk. The Council could not rely on the usual patterns, the predictable responses that diplomacy depended on. In their chambers, as members argued, one fact became painfully clear. Humanity didn't need them. They had grown, evolved, and adapted without the Council's intervention, and they would continue to do so with or without permission. They weren't looking for approval. They were demanding respect, a place of their own on their own terms. And as much as it frightened the Council, they couldn't deny the truth. Humanity was no longer an emerging species to be guided or molded. They had become something the Council had never faced, a fully independent force, one that would shape the galaxy not by permission, but by presence alone. The Galactic Council had exhausted nearly every diplomatic avenue, each more generous than the last. The humans continued to respond with the same steady, unwavering stance, refusal. In a last attempt to avoid outright conflict, they dispatched an esteemed delegate, a figure well-versed in negotiations and compromise, with orders to meet humanity face-to-face and convey the Council's latest offer. It was a proposition that nearly every other species would accept without question: resources, protection, and a prominent voice within the Council's decision-making processes. The delegate arrived at a neutral station on a moon orbiting the human-held sector. It was as close as the humans would allow any Council representative, a boundary they had made explicitly clear. The station, stark and functional, reflected humanity's practicality and focus on purpose over form. The delegate, accustomed to the ornate beauty of Council chambers, found the surroundings both uninviting and unnervingly efficient. When the human representative arrived, they offered no elaborate greeting, no diplomatic platitudes. They took their seat, direct and focused, exuding a calm confidence that left the delegates slightly unsettled. Humans were known for their unpredictable intensity, and the delegate felt the weight of that reputation in every moment of silence that passed between them. The delegate cleared their throat and began, outlining the Council's offer in practiced, careful terms. The Council was prepared to recognize humanity as a full member, granting them access to exclusive resources, advanced technologies, and even a degree of autonomy within their own sector. The Council was willing to go further than ever before, bending rules and adapting policies, all in an effort to bring humanity under its protective banner. With each point, the delegate spoke with a conviction honed by years of successful negotiations. The human representative listened quietly, their expression unreadable, eyes steady. They didn't interrupt, didn't shift, or show any reaction that might reveal their thoughts. When the delegate finished, there was a brief, charged silence. The delegate waited, expecting at least some questions, some indication that the human might be considering the offer. Instead, The human leaned forward slightly, their voice low but clear. "Thank you for your proposal, but our position remains the same. Humanity will not be joining the Galactic Council." The bluntness of the statement sent a ripple of shock through the delegate, who struggled to hide it. They had expected hesitation, maybe even the need for further concessions, but not outright rejection. Suppressing a flare of frustration, the delegate pressed on, attempting to reframe the offer. Surely the humans could see the advantages: access to resources they had yet to develop, security from potential threats, a chance to integrate with the larger galactic society. But the human only shook their head, the hint of a slight smile playing at the corner of their mouth. "We don't need the Council's protection," they replied calmly. "We've survived on our own, adapted to challenges without intervention. Your resources are appreciated, but we have learned to provide for ourselves. As for integration, we have our own culture, our own path. We don't need your approval or your system to thrive." There was no arrogance in their tone, no anger or defensiveness, just an unshakable certainty. To them, the Council's offer was simply unnecessary, a gilded cage that humanity had no interest in occupying. The delegate felt an unease building, an unsettling realization that humans saw themselves as neither inferior nor superior. They simply existed outside the Council's reach, and that alone was enough for them. Attempting to pivot, the delegate tried a more personal appeal, shifting from practicality to the principles of unity and shared knowledge, of the prosperity that could come from standing together. But the humans' expression didn't change. They were unyielding, a presence that couldn't be swayed by promises of comfort or security. The delegate's words seemed to slide past them, as though they had heard it all before and had already made up their minds. "You misunderstand us," the human finally said, breaking the delegate's stream of reasoning. "We are not rejecting you out of hostility. We simply have no desire to give up our autonomy, to be part of a structure that limits us. The Council's order may work for others, but it doesn't suit us. We choose our own risks and face our own consequences." The simplicity of the statement left the delegate momentarily speechless. The humans weren't arguing for superiority, nor were they antagonistic. They didn't see themselves as above the Council but apart from it, a species that followed a different compass, one that didn't align with galactic protocols or expectations. And that dissonance was the root of the Council's discomfort. Humanity wasn't merely refusing membership. They were asserting a different way of existence, one that challenged the Council's very assumptions of order and unity. The delegate, realizing they were losing ground, tried once more to highlight the advantages of collaboration, of shared resources and knowledge. But the human's expression remained unchanged, unwavering. The Council's greatest allure, its power, its resources, its protection, had no hold over them. "We appreciate the Council's efforts," the human concluded, their tone polite but firm. "But we are not interested in sacrificing our freedom, even for the benefits you offer. Our autonomy is not something we negotiate." The delegate felt a deep frustration, bordering on desperation. How could they make the humans understand that isolation would only bring more risks, more threats? But the humans seemed almost amused by the delegate's persistence, as if they understood something that the Council didn't, a truth buried beneath the rhetoric and diplomacy. "It's not that we're blind to risk," the human said, sensing the delegate's distress. "We understand the dangers of standing alone, of refusing the safety that the Council offers. But we are willing to face that risk, to live by our choices, without interference or oversight." The words lingered, stark and resolute, and the delegate felt a chill of realization. The Council's offers were irrelevant because humanity was driven by something far deeper than survival or prosperity. They valued something the Council had never had to consider: the freedom to stand on their own, no matter the cost. In their eyes, autonomy was worth every sacrifice, every hardship, and no amount of Council promises could replace that. Defeated, the delegate sat back, recognizing that no further arguments would sway the human. Humanity's refusal wasn't about stubbornness or pride, it was a core belief, an unshakable foundation that the Council's influence could never touch. The delegate returned to the Council chambers with a heavy heart, realizing that the galaxy now held a force unlike any they had known. Humanity would stand alone, by choice, and the Council's authority, for the first time, felt small against such unyielding resolve. A broadcast arrived at the Galactic Council's central chamber, originating from the humans themselves. It was unprecedented. Humanity had never initiated contact with the Council on their own terms. The message began simply, without formality or flourish. In the cold, clear way humanity had come to be known for, their representative outlined a stance that sent ripples through the Council. To the Galactic Council, the message started, steady and direct. We recognize your efforts to extend an invitation of membership and unity. However, we are formally declining all offers of integration. Humanity values independence, self-determination, and the ability to govern our own path. There was a pause, a moment of silence that felt pointed. The council chambers were silent as the words settled, each representative's expression growing darker, more concerned. Humanity was doing more than rejecting the council's offer. They were declaring their right to exist outside it. The message continued, unwavering. From the outset, we have chosen to develop in our own way. Your council is a remarkable institution, built on principles of unity and oversight. But those principles do not align with our values. We operate on our own terms, and while we respect the council's authority over its member systems, we do not acknowledge that authority over us. This outright refusal of the Council's power was a shock. It struck at the very foundation of the Council's existence, challenging the assumption that all civilizations should be brought under one unified governance. Humanity was rejecting not just membership but the idea that any species could claim oversight over another without consent. We are aware of the risks of remaining independent, the human speaker continued. We accept that there are threats beyond our borders, that isolation comes with dangers. But we are prepared to face them, whatever the cost. This is not a sign of hostility. We simply believe that freedom, true freedom, can only exist when a species chooses its own destiny, free of outside interference. There was a finality in the words that couldn't be ignored. Humanity was willing to accept hardship, isolation, even potential annihilation, over the comfort of council protection. They weren't being reckless or prideful. Their refusal was a matter of principle, a belief so ingrained that they were willing to risk everything for it. The council members exchanged looks, an unspoken fear beginning to spread among them. This wasn't the response of a reckless or naive species. It was the calculated, informed decision of a civilization that had assessed the risks and made its choice. Humanity didn't fear the council. They were prepared to face whatever consequences might follow. Then the tone of the message shifted, becoming firmer, more resolute. We do not seek conflict with the Council, nor do we wish to provoke hostility. But understand this clearly, we will defend ourselves, and we will not yield. Any attempt to force our hand, to impose your authority on us, will be met with resistance. The Council representatives sat in stunned silence. Humans weren't threatening war, but their stance was unmistakable. They were prepared to defend their independence to the last, willing to go to any lengths to protect it. The Council, which prided itself on diplomacy and unity, was unprepared for such a blunt, unapologetic assertion of sovereignty. The human message continued, each word a measured blow. We respect the Council's mission to maintain order and peace among its member species. But we are not part of that mission, nor do we wish to be. Our history has shown us that true peace can only exist when it is chosen, not enforced. The Council, used to being the final authority in matters of interstellar governance, felt a collective unease growing. Humanity's refusal to join was a direct challenge to their authority. Other species had occasionally questioned the Council's decisions, but none had outright refused its jurisdiction. And here was humanity, standing alone, refusing to bow, showing an independence that bordered on defiance. As a sign of respect, the message concluded, we ask that you refrain from further attempts to integrate us into your governance. We will not respond to further requests for negotiation on this matter. Our path is our own, and we will walk it with or without your approval. The broadcast ended abruptly, leaving the council chambers in a heavy, stunned silence. The humans had made their position clear: diplomacy, negotiation, alliance, all rejected. The Council's typical methods of persuasion and compromise were meaningless in the face of humanity's unyielding stance. A murmur began to spread through the room. The representatives were shaken, some visibly disturbed, others deep in thought. The humans hadn't threatened violence, nor had they disparaged the Council or its mission. They had simply stated their boundaries, their refusal to be ruled, and they'd done so without a single moment of hesitation. One council member finally spoke, voicing what many were thinking. If humanity remains outside our oversight, what's to prevent other species from following their example? They're challenging not just our authority but the entire concept of unified governance. The fear was palpable. Humanity's declaration of independence was a dangerous precedent. Other species might look to humans as a model, questioning the Council's authority, seeking autonomy. And if enough followed that path, the Council's carefully constructed order could crumble. A more cautious member raised a different concern. If we attempt to force them, we risk provoking the very conflict we aim to prevent. Humanity is unpredictable. They might stand alone, but they won't stand down. The implications weighed heavily. Humanity's defiance threatened the Council's integrity, yet any attempt to subdue or coerce them could lead to a war that might fracture the galaxy. It was a dilemma with no easy solution. Humanity was a force they could neither ignore nor control. In the silence that followed, the Council members sat with a dawning realization. They were no longer dealing with a simple issue of diplomacy. Humanity wasn't just another species to be integrated or subdued. They were something far more dangerous, an idea, a living testament to the power of self-determination. And ideas, once ignited, were hard to extinguish. The Council was left to grapple with a truth they couldn't ignore. Humanity would remain outside their reach, an autonomous force standing against the tide. They had issued no threats, no promises, only the unmistakable assertion of their will. And as the Council members sat in uneasy silence, one thought echoed among them: how long could they maintain control in a galaxy where humanity had chosen a path of its own? The Council members sat in stunned silence after humanity's broadcast ended, each processing the implications in their own way. The humans hadn't just refused, they had done so with an unflinching, unapologetic clarity that shook the Council to its core. For millennia, the Council had existed as the ultimate authority, a unifying body that brought order to the chaos of the galaxy. Now, one species had declared themselves outside its reach, outside its laws, and that defiance was like a fracture running through the Council's very foundation. A murmur began, low and tense, growing louder as the representatives argued, each species reacting differently to humanity's defiance. Some, like the more militaristic factions, were ready to respond with force, unwilling to allow such open rebellion. To them, humanity was a threat that had to be neutralized before it could spread. If left unchecked, this defiance could inspire others, and the Council's authority would erode. "Do you not see?" one of them argued, his voice rising above the rest. "They are challenging everything we stand for. If we let them stand alone, other systems will question their own allegiance. Our structure, our peace, it relies on unity, on obedience. We cannot allow a rogue element to disrupt it." Others, however, recognized the danger of such a move. Humanity was unlike any species they had encountered, unpredictable, fiercely independent, and willing to defend their stance at any cost. To confront them directly could mean risking a conflict on a scale they hadn't seen in ages. "If we try to subdue them, we risk war," another voice countered, calmer but equally insistent. "They've shown their resolve. Humanity will not yield, not even to our combined forces. If we make a move against them, we're risking an escalation that could shatter everything we've built." The debate continued, shifting from the specifics of humanity to the larger implications. For the first time, the Council was forced to confront the fragility of its own power. They had always assumed their structure was the best path to peace, that any species outside their reach was simply waiting to be brought into the fold. But humanity had shattered that illusion. They had exposed the truth the Council had long ignored: peace was only peace when it was chosen freely. One of the older Council members spoke up, her voice measured but filled with gravity. "Humanity is forcing us to see our own limits. We cannot control them, nor can we control the minds of others who see their stance. If they succeed in standing alone, they will prove that the Council's authority is not absolute, that unity is not the only path. This thought unsettled the room, filling the Council members with a strange mix of fear and resentment. Humanity's message was a challenge, not of strength but of principles. They were demanding something no species had ever dared to claim: true autonomy, the right to exist without Council oversight, to choose their path without interference. It was a stance that threatened the very foundation of the Council's ideology, and they knew it. But as the arguments wore on, a quiet realization began to settle among the Council members. Humanity's defiance had exposed a weakness they hadn't anticipated, not in their military or technology but in the perception of their authority. They were powerful, but only insofar as other species agreed to abide by their rules. Humanity had simply opted out, and for all the Council's influence, they found themselves unable to force the humans back into line without risking everything. A grim silence fell over the chamber, punctuated by the occasional murmur. The Council had always operated on the assumption that every species could be persuaded, either through diplomacy or force. But humanity's decision had defied that assumption, and in doing so, they had revealed the Council's own vulnerability. For the first time, they saw that their reach was not as all-encompassing as they had believed. Finally, one of the Council's most respected voices spoke, addressing the room in a tone that brooked no dissent. "We must accept that humanity is beyond our control. Any attempt to force them will not only fail but will damage our standing across the galaxy. We have to let them be, no matter the risks." This decision didn't come easily, and many were still unsettled. But as each representative weighed the alternatives, it became clear that attempting to subjugate humanity would only embolden them further. In the end, they saw the truth: humanity was a force that couldn't be bent, only respected from a distance. The decision was reluctant, filled with a quiet sense of defeat, but it was made nonetheless. Humanity would be left alone, their autonomy recognized, their independence unchallenged. It was a compromise none of them had expected, and yet it was the only option that wouldn't risk open rebellion, not just from humanity but potentially from other species who might be watching. The Council dispersed that day in a state of unease, each representative grappling with the new reality that humanity had forced them to confront. For the first time, the Council had encountered a species that couldn't be brought to heel, a species willing to stand alone, to challenge an order that most had accepted without question. And as the Council members returned to their own systems, the weight of this shift lingered. From that day forward, humanity was known as the rogue element of the galaxy, the species that had chosen a different path, one that defied the norm and stood outside the Council's control. And in the back of every Council member's mind, one question lingered, a silent, unspoken fear: would humanity's defiance inspire others to seek the same freedom?
Admiral James Thornton stood on the bridge of the flagship, watching as the Galactic Council's emissary materialized in the air before him. The alien figure, towering and imposing, delivered its message with chilling clarity. Earth must submit and provide tribute, or face obliteration. Thornton, a veteran of countless space missions, felt a surge of defiance. His keen blue eyes never wavered as he studied the emissary. The decision that lay ahead was not just about survival. It was about the future of humanity. In the war room below, Earth's leaders gathered, their faces a mix of fear and determination. The room hummed with a low buzz of anxious conversations. Prime Minister David Harper, a man known for his calm under pressure, called the meeting to order. "We must discuss our response," Harper began, his voice steady. "Admiral Thornton, what are our options?" Thornton stepped forward, his presence commanding the room's attention. "We have two choices: surrender and become vassals, or fight and defend our sovereignty. I believe we should resist. We have the technology and the strategic advantage to mount a formidable defense." Lieutenant Sarah Connor, Thornton's second-in-command, nodded in agreement. Known for her tactical acumen, she had already begun analyzing potential battle strategies. "We can leverage our advanced stealth capabilities and hit their supply lines. Guerrilla tactics will be our strength." Dr. Rahul Patel, the chief engineer, leaned in. Our new energy shields and propulsion systems give us a significant edge. We can withstand their initial assault and strike back where they least expect it. Harper looked around the room, weighing the counsel of his advisors. And the risks? Thornton's jaw tightened. High, but the alternative is slavery. The room fell silent as each member pondered the gravity of the decision. Finally, Harper spoke. We fight, mobilize the fleet, and may our resolve be stronger than their arrogance. As orders were relayed, the atmosphere shifted from uncertainty to purpose. Thornton returned to the bridge, where the crew was already preparing for the impending conflict. The stars outside the viewport seemed to glint with a newfound intensity, as if aware of the battle about to unfold. Thornton took a moment to address his crew. We are facing a powerful enemy, but we are not alone. Each one of you is vital to this mission. Remember, we fight not just for Earth, but for our right to exist as free beings in this universe. The crew responded with a unified, determined nod. Thornton's words carried the weight of history and the promise of tomorrow. As the fleet moved into formation, sensors began to detect the approach of the Council's vanguard. The tension on the bridge escalated, but Thornton's voice remained calm. Prepare for engagement. All hands to battle stations. The ships, sleek and bristling with weaponry, took their positions. The vastness of space was about to become a battleground, with the fate of humanity hanging in the balance. Thornton's strategic mind whirred as he issued commands, each move calculated to counter the alien threat. As the enemy ships appeared on the horizon, shimmering ominously, Thornton's gaze hardened. He knew that the coming hours would test their mettle in ways they had never imagined. Yet he felt a quiet confidence. Humanity had faced existential threats before and had always found a way to endure. Incoming transmission, announced the communications officer. The emissary's face reappeared, smirking. Your defiance is noted. Prepare to be annihilated. Thornton cut the transmission with a flick of his hand. All units, engage on my mark. The first salvo of missiles streaked through the void, marking the beginning of humanity's stand against the Galactic Council. Explosions lit up the darkness, and the battle commenced with ferocious intensity. In the chaos of the skirmish, Lieutenant Connor's voice cut through the comms. Admiral, the flagship is taking heavy fire. We need to adjust our tactics. Thornton nodded, quickly recalculating. Deploy the stealth fighters. Target their command ship. We need to disrupt their coordination. As the stealth fighters launched, cloaked and nearly invisible, Thornton watched the tactical display with laser focus. The initial clash was brutal, but humanity's resilience began to show. The enemy was powerful, but they had underestimated the ingenuity and determination of the human spirit. Suddenly, a massive explosion rocked the flagship. The deck shuddered beneath Thornton's feet, but he remained steady. Damage report. Critical hit to the aft section, came the reply. We're losing power. Redirect all available power to shields and weapons, Thornton commanded. We hold the line here. Just as it seemed the tide was turning in their favor, a colossal alien battleship appeared out of hyperspace, dwarfing anything they had seen before. Brace for impact, Thornton shouted, as the new threat loomed large on the horizon. Thornton's flagship shuddered as the colossal alien battleship loomed large on the view screen. All hands, brace for impact, he ordered, his voice steady despite the imminent threat. The bridge crew sprang into action, their movements precise and rehearsed. Lieutenant Sarah Connor, ever vigilant, quickly analyzed the new adversary. Admiral, their ship is equipped with advanced shielding and multiple weapons arrays. We'll need to outmaneuver them. Agreed, Thornton replied. Helm, evasive maneuvers. Weapons, prepare to fire on my mark. As the human fleet engaged, the void was filled with beams of light and exploding debris. The alien battleship unleashed a barrage of energy blasts, shaking the smaller human ships. Thornton's mind raced through possible tactics. Dr. Patel, any updates on our new energy shields? Thornton asked, hoping for a technological edge. Shields are holding, but barely, Dr. Patel reported from engineering. We can maintain current levels for now, but if they intensify their attack, we'll be in trouble. Understood. Lieutenant Connor, initiate countermeasures and deploy decoys. We need to confuse their targeting systems. Connor nodded, her fingers flying over the controls. Dozens of decoy drones launched from the human ships, creating a field of false targets. The alien weapons faltered, momentarily thrown off. Now, all units, focus fire on their shield generators, Thornton commanded. Coordinated beams of energy and missile fire converged on the designated target. The alien shields flared, struggling to absorb the assault. On the tactical display, the enemy ship's defenses began to flicker. Thornton seized the opportunity. Full attack. Concentrate all firepower. The combined might of the human fleet broke through the alien shielding, and several direct hits landed on the enemy hull. Explosions rippled across the alien ship, sending debris spiraling into space. Admiral, their main weapon systems are down, Connor reported, a hint of triumph in her voice. Good work, everyone, Thornton said, allowing himself a brief moment of relief. But we're not out of this yet. Dr. Patel, how's the fleet holding up? Minor damage to most ships, but we've lost 2 destroyers, Patel replied. Casualty reports are coming in. Thornton felt the weight of each loss but pushed forward. Prepare for a second wave. The Council won't give up this easily. As if on cue, sensors picked up more enemy ships dropping out of hyperspace. This time, smaller, faster craft designed for close combat. They swarmed the human fleet, weaving through defensive fire with agility. Adjust formation. Protect our flanks, Thornton barked. Connor, take charge of the fighter squadrons and repel those interceptors. Connor relayed the orders, and human fighters surged forward to meet the enemy head-on. The battle intensified, with dogfights erupting across the field. Pilots displayed extraordinary skill, evading enemy fire and striking back with precision. Thornton's focus never wavered. He coordinated the fleet's movements, anticipating the enemy's tactics. His experience and intuition kept the human ships one step ahead, but the battle was far from over. Admiral, detecting unusual energy signatures from the alien flagship, the sensor officer reported. It looks like they're charging a massive weapon. All ships, prepare for impact, Thornton shouted. The alien weapon fired, a blinding beam of energy cutting through space. Thornton's flagship took the brunt of the blast, alarms blaring as systems overloaded. Damage report, Thornton demanded, gripping the railing to steady himself. Heavy damage to the port side, shields down to 20%, came the response. Thornton knew they couldn't withstand another hit like that. We need to take out that weapon. Dr. Patel, any ideas? Patel's voice crackled over the comms. If we can overload their energy core, it might cause a chain reaction and disable the weapon. Connor, target their energy core. All ships, cover our approach. The fleet rallied, focusing their fire on the alien flagship's energy core. The battle raged, with ships dodging enemy fire and retaliating with every ounce of firepower they had. Finally, a well-placed torpedo from Connor's squadron breached the alien ship's hull, striking the energy core. The resulting explosion was cataclysmic, sending shockwaves through the battlefield. The alien flagship disintegrated in a blinding flash. Thornton watched as the remnants of the enemy fleet retreated. All units stand down. Begin recovery operations. As the human ships regrouped, Thornton took a moment to reflect. They had won this battle, but at great cost. The losses weighed heavily on him, but he knew the fight was far from over. Prepare for immediate repairs and resupply, he ordered. We need to be ready for whatever comes next. As Thornton issued his commands, an urgent message came through from Earth. Admiral, we've intercepted a transmission. The Council is mobilizing their main fleet. They're preparing for a full-scale invasion. Thornton's eyes hardened. The true test of their resolve was yet to come. Admiral James Thornton stood at the central console of the flagship, studying the damage reports. The battle had taken a toll, but the fleet remained intact. The enemy's unexpected retreat provided a brief respite, but Thornton knew it wouldn't last. "Status update, Dr. Patel?" he asked, turning to the chief engineer. "Repairs are underway," Patel replied. "We've managed to stabilize the shields and are working on restoring full power. We'll be battle-ready in a few hours." "Good. We need to be prepared for the next wave," Thornton said, his mind already calculating their next move. In the war room, key members of the fleet gathered. Lieutenant Sarah Connor projected a tactical map, highlighting recent engagements and current fleet positions. "We've inflicted significant damage on the enemy, but intelligence suggests they're regrouping for a full-scale invasion." Prime Minister David Harper's face appeared on the comms screen. "Admiral, we intercepted a transmission. The Council's main fleet is on the move. Their goal is total annihilation." Thornton nodded. "We expected this. Our next move is crucial. We need a strategy that maximizes our strengths and exploits their weaknesses." Connor pointed to a section of the map. "This sector contains a dense asteroid field. We can use it for cover and launch ambushes. It's risky but could give us the element of surprise." "Agreed," Thornton said. "Dr. Patel, can we enhance our stealth systems for this operation?" "We're working on boosting the cloak efficiency," Patel responded. "It should be operational by the time we reach the asteroid field." "Excellent. Connor, coordinate with the fleet. We move out as soon as repairs are complete," Thornton ordered. As the crew set to work, Thornton took a moment to visit the medical bay. Injured personnel lay in rows, attended by medics. The sight of his wounded comrades steeled his resolve. He approached one of the beds, where a young pilot named Ensign Kelly was recovering. "How are you holding up, Kelly?" Thornton asked, his tone gentle. "I'll be ready to fly again soon, sir," Kelly replied, attempting a smile despite the pain. "That's the spirit," Thornton said. "We need every pilot we can get. Rest up and get back to us." Leaving the medical bay, Thornton felt a surge of determination. These brave men and women were counting on him to lead them through the coming storm. He returned to the bridge, where final preparations were underway. As the fleet entered the asteroid field, the environment changed dramatically. Massive rocks drifted silently, creating a labyrinthine battlefield. The ships navigated carefully, using the asteroids as cover. "All units, maintain radio silence and engage cloaking devices," Thornton ordered. "We'll use the element of surprise to our advantage." The minutes ticked by as the fleet lay in wait. Suddenly, enemy ships began to appear on the sensors, moving cautiously through the field. Thornton watched the tactical display, waiting for the right moment. "Now," he commanded. The human fleet sprang into action, emerging from their hiding places and unleashing a devastating volley of fire. The enemy, caught off guard, scrambled to respond. Connor coordinated the attack with precision, directing squadrons to key targets. Human fighters darted through the asteroid field, striking enemy vessels with deadly accuracy. The chaos of the battlefield played to their strengths. Dr. Patel's enhanced cloaking systems proved invaluable, allowing human ships to disappear and reappear unpredictably. The enemy struggled to track their movements, creating confusion and disorder. Amid the battle, Thornton received an urgent message from one of the reconnaissance ships. "Admiral, we've located the enemy command ship. It's heavily guarded, but if we can take it out, we can cripple their fleet." "Understood. Connor, prepare a strike team. We're going after their command ship," Thornton ordered. As the strike team assembled, Thornton briefed them on the mission. "This is our chance to turn the tide. Hit them hard and fast. We need to disable their command structure." The strike team launched, weaving through the battlefield towards their target. Enemy fire intensified as they neared the command ship, but the team pressed on, driven by the importance of their mission. Thornton monitored their progress from the bridge, his heart racing. The strike team reached the command ship and initiated their attack, targeting critical systems. Explosions rippled through the enemy vessel, and its defenses faltered. "Command ship is disabled," Connor reported. "The enemy fleet is in disarray." Thornton felt a surge of hope. "All units, press the attack. This is our moment." The human fleet redoubled their efforts, capitalizing on the enemy's confusion. Ships that had been on the defensive now went on the offensive, driving the enemy back. The tide of battle shifted decisively. An alert flashed on the tactical display. "Incoming transmission from Earth," the comms officer announced. "It's urgent." Thornton's expression turned serious as he opened the channel, bracing for the news that awaited them. Admiral James Thornton stood at the command console, the incoming transmission from Earth filling the bridge with urgency. Prime Minister Harper's face was grave. "Admiral, we've confirmed it. The Galactic Council's main fleet is en route. They're preparing for a full-scale invasion." Thornton nodded, his mind racing. "Understood, Prime Minister. We'll be ready." He cut the transmission and turned to his officers. "All hands, prepare for battle. We need to defend our home with everything we have." The fleet, still in the asteroid field, began final preparations. Lieutenant Sarah Connor coordinated the repositioning of ships, ensuring they utilized the natural cover provided by the massive rocks. Dr. Rahul Patel oversaw the final adjustments to the stealth systems and weapon calibrations. "Admiral, we have incoming contacts on long-range sensors," the tactical officer reported. "It's the Council's main fleet." Thornton took a deep breath. "All units, activate cloaking devices and hold positions. Wait for my signal." As the enemy fleet drew closer, the size of the armada became evident. Dozens of warships, bristling with weaponry, moved in a tight formation. Thornton's eyes narrowed. He knew this battle would be the ultimate test of their strategy and resolve. "Patel, status on the energy shields?" Thornton asked. "Shields at maximum capacity," Patel replied. "We're as ready as we'll ever be." Thornton glanced at Connor. "Are the strike teams in position?" "Yes, sir. Ready to launch on your command," Connor confirmed. The seconds ticked by as the enemy fleet closed in. Thornton raised his hand, eyes fixed on the tactical display. "Wait for it. Wait. Now. All units, engage." The human fleet sprang into action, decloaking and launching a coordinated assault. The asteroid field lit up with the glow of energy weapons and explosions. Human ships weaved through the asteroids, striking enemy vessels with precision. Thornton's flagship led the charge, its weapons blazing. "Connor, take command of the fighter squadrons. Patel, maintain shield integrity. We can't afford to lose any ships." Connor directed the fighters, her voice calm and authoritative. Human pilots displayed extraordinary skill, taking down enemy fighters and protecting the larger ships. Patel worked tirelessly, rerouting power to shields and weapons as needed. Despite their efforts, the sheer number of enemy ships began to take a toll. Thornton knew they needed to disrupt the enemy's command structure. "Focus fire on their flagship," he ordered. "We need to cut off the head." The fleet redirected their assault, targeting the massive enemy command ship. The alien vessel returned fire, its advanced weaponry causing significant damage. Thornton's ship shook violently as it took a direct hit. "Damage report," he shouted. "Heavy damage to the port side," the damage control officer responded. "We've lost several weapon systems." Thornton gritted his teeth. "Keep firing. We need to take that ship down." As the battle raged, an idea formed in Thornton's mind. "Patel, can we overload their shields with a concentrated energy burst?" "It's risky, but it might work," Patel replied. "We'd need to get close enough to deliver the burst directly." Thornton made a quick decision. "Connor, prepare a strike team. We're going in." Connor's eyes widened, but she nodded. "Understood, Admiral. We'll cover you." Thornton led a small team in a shuttle, weaving through the battlefield towards the enemy flagship. Under heavy fire, they approached the alien vessel. Patel worked frantically to prepare the energy burst. "Ready, Admiral," Patel said, his voice steady despite the chaos. "Do it," Thornton ordered. Patel activated the burst, and a blinding pulse of energy shot from the shuttle, striking the enemy ship's shields. The shields flickered and then collapsed, leaving the vessel vulnerable. "All units, concentrate fire on the enemy flagship," Thornton commanded. The human fleet unleashed a relentless barrage. The enemy command ship shuddered under the assault, and finally, with a massive explosion, it was destroyed. The destruction of the flagship sent shockwaves through the enemy fleet. Disoriented and leaderless, the alien ships began to retreat. "Victory is ours," Connor reported, a smile breaking through her usual stoicism. Thornton breathed a sigh of relief. "Well done, everyone. Begin recovery operations and prepare for possible reinforcements." Thornton stood on the bridge, watching as the remnants of the enemy fleet fled. He knew the fight for humanity's future was far from over, but today, they had proven their strength and determination. "All ships, set course for Earth. We have a lot of work ahead of us."
The Galactic Council, a majestic assembly of the most powerful and ancient species in the galaxy, had always prided itself on its wisdom and understanding of the civilizations under its watchful eye. For eons, the Council had maintained peace and order across countless star systems, using a delicate balance of diplomacy, strategic alliances, and, when necessary, force. Among the myriad species represented in this grand body, humans were considered a minor, albeit intriguing, curiosity. To the Council, humans were a species of paradoxes, capable of great technological feats, yet seemingly adverse to the brutal realities of galactic warfare. From the Council's perspective, humanity's history was defined by a persistent preference for diplomacy, trade, and cultural exchange. Humans were known more for their scientific discoveries, artistic achievements, and diplomatic missions than for any military conquests. The Council had observed countless human interactions with other species, noting how they consistently sought peaceful resolutions to conflicts, often going to great lengths to avoid bloodshed. This pattern of behavior led the Council to a firm conclusion: humans were inherently peaceful, perhaps even afraid of war. This belief was bolstered by numerous treaties humans had signed over the years, often agreeing to terms that, while beneficial, seemed to favor avoiding conflict at almost any cost. Even when tensions rose between humans and more aggressive species, humanity had always found a way to negotiate, to talk their way out of a fight, or to offer compromises that prevented escalation. There were many on the Council who took this as evidence of human frailty. The Zorvans, a warrior race with a long history of military dominance, often mocked humans as being too weak-hearted to stand in the face of true adversity. The Tarkesh, known for their cunning and strategic brilliance, dismissed humans as mere idealists, creatures who didn't understand the harsh realities of survival in a hostile galaxy. The Eilern, a species that thrived on conquest and power, saw humans as nothing more than naive dreamers who lacked the stomach for real battle. The Council's archives were filled with instances where humans had chosen to avoid conflict. There was the time when the Tshran, a notoriously aggressive species, had claimed a resource-rich asteroid belt that humans had laid claim to. Rather than escalating the situation, the humans had offered a trade agreement that benefited both parties, effectively avoiding what many believed would have been an inevitable war. Then there was the incident with the Zorvath pirates, where, instead of deploying their fleet to crush the raiders, the humans had negotiated a deal, providing the pirates with safe passage in exchange for peace. These examples, and many others like them, reinforced the Council's perception that humans simply did not have the capacity for war. To the Council, this was not necessarily a flaw. Every species had its strengths and weaknesses. However, it did lead to a certain complacency when considering humanity's role in the larger galactic order. The Council never saw the need to involve humans in major military alliances or to consider them as potential threats. Instead, they were content to leave humanity to its own devices, assuming that, when push came to shove, humans would either negotiate their way out of trouble or, if the situation became dire enough, simply retreat. But as the Council reveled in its supposed understanding of humanity, a new threat began to loom on the horizon. The Rogue Empire, a coalition of several outlaw species who had rejected the Council's authority, began its ruthless conquest to dominate the galaxy. This empire, led by the merciless and ambitious Vokar, sought to dismantle the established order, replacing it with a new regime where only the strong would survive. Their forces were brutal, efficient, and utterly without mercy. Star systems fell one by one as the Rogue Empire advanced, leaving devastation in its wake. The Council, for all its wisdom, was not immune to fear. The threat posed by the rogue empire was unlike anything they had faced in millennia. Discussions in the council chambers grew heated as they debated how best to respond to the growing crisis. There were those who advocated for immediate and overwhelming military action, while others called for diplomacy, hoping to broker some kind of peace with Vokar before it was too late. When the question of humanity's role in this looming conflict arose, the council was almost unanimous in its conclusion: humans would not fight. There was no reason to believe that humanity would abandon its long-standing aversion to war, especially in the face of such a terrifying adversary. The Council assumed that, at best, humans might offer some form of logistical or humanitarian support, perhaps opening their borders to refugees fleeing the rogue empire's onslaught. But when it came to taking up arms and joining the fight, the Council believed humanity would choose neutrality or, if pressed, flee to the safety of the outer colonies. The Council's decision was made. They would not call upon humanity to join the battle against the rogue empire. Instead, they focused on rallying the more traditionally warlike species, those who had proven their mettle in countless battles before. The Zorvans, the Tarkesh, the Eilern, they would be the ones to lead the charge. Humanity, in the Council's eyes, would remain on the sidelines, as they always had. For centuries, humanity played its role in the galaxy as a peace-loving civilization, content to explore the stars, share knowledge, and build alliances. But beneath this facade of diplomacy and cultural exchange lay a carefully guarded secret. Humanity had never been as naive or as passive as the Galactic Council believed. From the moment humans first encountered other intelligent species, they understood the potential for conflict, and they prepared for it in ways that no one outside Earth could have imagined. Long ago, as humanity expanded into the stars, they quietly began studying every species they encountered. They didn't just learn about their cultures and technologies. They meticulously analyzed their strengths and weaknesses, cataloging every detail that could be of use in a future conflict. This wasn't paranoia, it was pragmatism. Humans knew that peace could only be maintained if they were prepared to defend it, and they were determined to be ready for any threat that might arise. In secret, human military and intelligence agencies embarked on a centuries-long project to gather and analyze data from across the galaxy. They infiltrated alien governments, tapped into communication networks, and conducted covert operations that remained undetected by even the most advanced species. Through these efforts, humanity built a comprehensive understanding of the tactical and strategic capabilities of every species in the galaxy. They knew which species relied on brute force, which ones preferred stealth, and which ones would crumble under psychological warfare. This intelligence wasn't just stored away for future reference. It was used to develop strategies and contingencies tailored to each potential adversary. Human military planners devised thousands of scenarios, from small skirmishes to full-scale interstellar wars, each one meticulously detailed and prepared for. They crafted plans that could turn the unique strengths of each alien species against them, exploiting every possible weakness. And these plans were constantly updated as new information came in, ensuring that humanity was always several steps ahead of any potential enemy. But knowledge alone wasn't enough. Humanity knew that to defend themselves, they needed more than just strategies. They needed the means to execute them. In the depths of space, far from prying eyes, humans developed some of the most advanced weaponry and technology the galaxy had ever seen. While the rest of the galaxy marveled at Earth's achievements in science and art, human engineers and scientists worked tirelessly in hidden facilities, creating weapons that could decimate entire fleets and technologies that could outmaneuver any known defense. Humanity's arsenal included AI-driven ships capable of autonomous combat, energy weapons that could pierce even the strongest shields, and stealth systems that rendered their vessels invisible to all known detection methods. They developed nanotechnology that could disable enemy equipment at a molecular level and cyber warfare capabilities that could bring down entire civilizations without firing a single shot. These innovations were kept under the strictest secrecy, known only to a select few within the highest echelons of human leadership. Leading these efforts were some of the greatest minds humanity had ever produced, military strategists who had studied the art of war since childhood, scientists who pushed the boundaries of what was technologically possible, and intelligence officers who had spent decades in the shadows, gathering the information that made all of this possible. These individuals were united by a single purpose: to ensure that when the time came, humanity would not only survive but emerge victorious, no matter the odds. Despite all these preparations, humanity continued to present a peaceful front to the galaxy. They maintained their diplomatic ties, participated in cultural exchanges, and continued to advocate for peace and cooperation. This wasn't a deception in the traditional sense, it was a reflection of humanity's true desires. They didn't seek war, and they genuinely hoped that the need for these preparations would never come. But they also knew that hope wasn't enough, and they were unwilling to leave their survival to chance. Every now and then, humanity would conduct a covert operation to test their weapons and strategies, careful not to attract attention. These operations were executed with precision, leaving no trace that could be linked back to Earth. In one instance, a small fleet of pirate ships that had been preying on merchant vessels in a distant star system suddenly vanished without a trace. The pirates' disappearance was chalked up to internal conflicts, but in reality it had been a test of a new type of weapon, a weapon so advanced that it eliminated its targets without leaving a single piece of debris. In another case, an alien research outpost reported a brief but complete loss of control over their systems, followed by a return to normal operations with no apparent damage. The incident was dismissed as a minor glitch, but in truth, it had been a demonstration of humanity's cyber warfare capabilities, a silent reminder that no system in the galaxy was truly secure from human intervention. The rogue empire moved with a terrifying efficiency, sweeping through star systems like a wildfire, leaving nothing but destruction in its wake. It was as if the galaxy had never seen such a force before, a coalition of outlaw species, each with a deep-seated grudge against the Galactic Council, united under the iron rule of the Vokar. Their strategy was brutal and direct: overwhelm each system with sheer numbers and advanced weaponry, leaving no survivors to mount a resistance. Planets that had once thrived with life and culture were reduced to lifeless husks in mere days. Fear spread quickly across the galaxy as news of the Rogue Empire's conquests reached even the most distant colonies. Worlds that had once felt secure under the protection of the Council now questioned their safety. The speed at which the Vokar's forces moved was unprecedented, and the sheer brutality they displayed sent shockwaves through every species. Entire fleets were obliterated before they could even mount a defense, and those who tried to flee were hunted down mercilessly. The Rogue Empire was not just a military force, it was a statement, a declaration that the old order was crumbling, and a new one was rising in its place. The Galactic Council, for all its experience and wisdom, was caught off guard by the ferocity of the Empire's advance. There were hurried meetings and urgent discussions as the Council scrambled to respond to the growing threat. They mobilized fleets, fortified key positions, and sent diplomats to distant systems in a desperate attempt to rally support. Yet, despite the growing crisis, the Council continued to underestimate humanity's role in the conflict. The belief that humans were too peaceful, too afraid of war, remained deeply ingrained in the minds of the Council members. As the Rogue Empire continued its relentless march, the Council focused its efforts on shoring up alliances with the more traditionally militant species. The Zorvans and Islan were called upon to lead the charge, their battle-hardened forces seen as the best hope of stemming the tide. The Tarkesh, with their strategic brilliance, were tasked with devising countermeasures and coordinating defensive efforts. And yet, in all these plans and discussions, humanity was mentioned only in passing. The assumption was clear: humans might offer logistical support or take in refugees, but they would not fight. They would do what they always did: negotiate, retreat, survive. However, not everyone within the Council was convinced of this narrative. A few voices, quieter but growing in concern, began to question the wisdom of leaving humanity out of the equation. The Ailunar, a species known for their intuition and foresight, quietly urged the Council to consider the possibility that humans might not be as passive as they appeared. There were whispers of human technological advancements, rumors of secretive military projects that had never been publicly acknowledged. But these warnings were dismissed by the majority, who still clung to the belief that humanity's aversion to war would keep them on the sidelines. The rogue empire's conquests drew ever closer to the heart of the galaxy, and with each victory, the Council's confidence waned. They had underestimated the Vokar, just as they had underestimated the ruthlessness of the forces aligned against them. But the tipping point came when the Empire set its sights on a system that was of great importance to humanity, an outer colony, home to millions of humans and a strategic hub for interstellar trade. The attack was swift and devastating, with the rogue Empire's fleet overwhelming the colony's defenses in a matter of hours. For the Council, this was the moment of truth. They expected humanity to respond as they always had, with negotiations, perhaps an offer to surrender the colony in exchange for peace. Some even believed that humans might abandon the colony altogether, retreating to safer systems. The Council prepared for the inevitable diplomatic pleas, ready to offer what little support they could while focusing their military efforts elsewhere. After all, they reasoned, humans were not warriors. They were diplomats, traders, thinkers. They would never engage in a war they couldn't win. But humanity's response was nothing like what the Council had expected. There were no negotiations, no attempts to broker a deal. Instead, the humans remained eerily silent in the hours following the attack, a silence that unsettled even those who had dismissed them as inconsequential. This silence wasn't born of fear. It was the calm before a storm that no one in the galaxy had anticipated. The Council's expectations, their assumptions about humanity's nature, were about to be shattered in the most dramatic way possible. As the rogue Empire's fleet settled into orbit around the captured colony, preparing to move on to their next target, they received an unexpected transmission. It wasn't a plea for mercy or an offer of surrender, it was a warning. A single message transmitted on all frequencies, declaring that the time for negotiation had passed. The humans were not going to retreat, and they were certainly not going to surrender. The rogue Empire had made a grave mistake, and now they would face the consequences. Humanity's decision to strike didn't come lightly, but it was a decision made with the full weight of their collective resolve. The attacks on their outer colony served as the catalyst, igniting a fierce debate among Earth's leaders and military strategists. For years, humanity had prepared for the worst while hoping for the best, but the time for hope had passed. Now they were faced with a choice: continue to play the role the galaxy had assigned them, or reveal the true extent of their capabilities and face the threat head-on. The discussions were intense, but there was a remarkable unity in the decision-making process. The realization that negotiation was no longer an option brought clarity. Across Earth and its colonies, leaders, generals, and citizens alike understood that this was a defining moment. It wasn't just about defending a single colony. It was about showing the galaxy that humanity would not be cowed, that they would stand up against tyranny and aggression, no matter the odds. The decision to strike was unanimous. Humanity would launch a preemptive attack against the rogue Empire, and they would do so with every weapon in their arsenal. When the order was given, the response was immediate and overwhelming. Humanity had been preparing for this moment for centuries, and now it was time to unleash the full might of their hidden arsenal. From secret bases scattered across the galaxy, fleets of advanced warships emerged, each one a marvel of human engineering. These ships were equipped with weapons and technology that the galaxy had never seen: plasma cannons that could rip through the thickest armor, stealth systems that rendered them invisible to enemy sensors, and AI-controlled drones that could outmaneuver any known fighter craft. The preemptive strike was swift and precise. Human fleets jumped into the heart of the rogue Empire's territory, catching their forces completely off guard. What followed was a display of military prowess that left the rogue Empire reeling. Entire enemy fleets were annihilated before they had a chance to respond, their ships torn apart by weapons they couldn't understand, much less defend against. Human tactics were brutal and efficient, designed not just to defeat the enemy but to shatter their will to fight. The battle over the captured colony was particularly devastating. The rogue Empire's fleet, confident in their control over the system, was utterly decimated within hours. Human ships appeared from nowhere, their stealth systems bypassing all enemy defenses. In a coordinated assault, they unleashed a barrage of firepower that left the rogue fleet in ruins. The few ships that managed to escape were pursued and destroyed, leaving no survivors to warn the rest of the Empire. On the ground, advanced human infantry units deployed with lethal precision. Equipped with exoskeletons that enhanced their strength and speed, they moved through the enemy ranks like ghosts, eliminating resistance with cold efficiency. The rogue Empire's soldiers, who had expected to face a demoralized and retreating enemy, were instead met with a force that was relentless and unstoppable. The colony was liberated in a matter of hours, and the message was clear: humanity was no longer on the defensive, they were taking the fight to the enemy. Back at the Galactic Council, the reaction to humanity's sudden and overwhelming response was one of utter disbelief. The Council had underestimated humanity at every turn, and now they were witnessing the consequences of their complacency. As reports of the battles poured in, the Council members struggled to comprehend what they were seeing. The humans they had thought to be weak and fearful were proving themselves to be one of the most formidable military forces in the galaxy. For the first time, the Council saw the full extent of humanity's power, and it shook them to their core. Species that had once mocked humans as naive and peaceful now watched in awe as human fleets dismantled the rogue Empire's forces with ruthless precision. The Council's chambers, once filled with confident voices dismissing the threat posed by the rogue Empire, were now silent as the reality of the situation set in. Humanity had not only joined the war, they had turned the tide in a way that no one had anticipated. As the rogue Empire's territories fell one by one, the Council was forced to confront the new balance of power in the galaxy. Humanity, long underestimated and overlooked, had emerged as a dominant force. Their willingness to strike, to use their full strength when necessary, left an indelible mark on the galaxy. The rogue Empire, once feared as an unstoppable juggernaut, was now on the brink of collapse, all because of a species the Council had believed to be afraid of war. The rogue Empire, once a terrifying force that seemed unstoppable, crumbled under the weight of humanity's relentless onslaught. What began as a shocking preemptive strike quickly evolved into a systematic dismantling of the Empire's military power. Human fleets, now fully revealed, swept through the rogue Empire's territories with unmatched precision. One by one, strongholds that had once been thought impregnable fell. Strategic strikes against key supply lines, communications hubs, and command centers left the rogue Empire in disarray, unable to mount an effective defense. The turning point came when humanity's forces cornered the rogue Empire's leadership on their homeworld. In a final, desperate attempt to hold their ground, the Vokar unleashed every remaining resource at their disposal. But it was futile. Human tactics, honed through centuries of preparation, rendered the rogue Empire's last stand nothing more than a formality. Advanced weaponry, superior coordination, and the sheer will to see the conflict through to its end left the rogue Empire with no escape. The final blow came not with a grand battle, but with the quiet, inevitable realization that they had lost, utterly and completely. With the defeat of the rogue Empire, the galaxy shifted its attention back to the Galactic Council. The very same body that had once dismissed humanity as a minor player now found itself in a state of shock and reevaluation. The Council had been wrong, profoundly so. Humanity was not the timid, peace-loving species they had assumed. The speed and decisiveness with which humans had neutralized the rogue Empire's threat forced the Council to confront a new reality. Humans were a force to be reckoned with, a power that could no longer be ignored or underestimated. As the reports of the rogue Empire's defeat spread across the galaxy, a palpable sense of awe and fear began to settle among the alien species. The Zorvans, who had once scoffed at the idea of humans as warriors, now spoke of them with a grudging respect. The Tarkesh, known for their strategic brilliance, acknowledged that humans had outmaneuvered even their most cunning plans. The Eilern, who had seen humanity as nothing more than naive dreamers, now saw them as equals, if not superiors, in the art of war. The Council's chambers, once filled with confident voices declaring humanity's weakness, were now quiet, their members deep in thought. They understood that they had misjudged humanity, and that this mistake had nearly cost them the galaxy. In the aftermath of the rogue Empire's defeat, the Council began to reassess their entire approach to galactic governance. New alliances were proposed, treaties were redrafted, and humanity was invited to join the inner circle of decision-makers, a position they had never before been offered. But with this newfound respect came an undercurrent of fear. The other species knew that if humanity could defeat the rogue empire with such ease, they could do the same to anyone who opposed them. The power dynamics within the council began to shift, with humans now holding a significant influence over decisions that would shape the future of the galaxy. Former rivals now sought to align themselves with humanity, recognizing that it was better to be an ally than to risk becoming an enemy. In the wake of their victory, humanity did not gloat or seek to dominate. Instead, they returned to the principles they had always valued: peace, cooperation, and mutual respect. But now, these principles were backed by the knowledge that they could enforce them if necessary. The galaxy, once skeptical of humanity's resolve, now understood that humans were not afraid of war. They had simply prepared for it in ways no one could have imagined. This preparation had not only saved them, but had reshaped the galaxy itself. As the dust settled, the galaxy entered a new era, one where the balance of power had shifted significantly. Humanity's rise as a military power brought stability, but also a new awareness among the Council's members. They knew that the future would be shaped by the decisions humanity made, and that the galaxy's peace now rested in human hands. The Council's misjudgment had led to one of the greatest underestimations in galactic history, and they vowed never to make such a mistake again. Humanity had always been seen as a peculiar oddity in the vast expanse of the Galactic Federation. While other species boasted of their might through centuries of warfare, territorial expansion, and violent conflicts, the humans seemed to occupy a different space. They were calm, diplomatic, and entirely too focused on peaceful endeavors. Most of the galaxy's elder races found it amusing, this young species that had emerged from their isolated planet with grand ideas of unity and cooperation. Their contribution to the Federation had largely been technological innovations, economic trade, and cultural exchanges. It wasn't that humanity didn't have a military. Every race in the galaxy knew they had one. But their forces had never been anything to boast about. While other species paraded their war fleets and heavily armored ground troops during Federation summits, humanity sent negotiators, scientists, and diplomats. The consensus among the galaxy's elites was that the humans were soft. Polite, efficient, useful, but soft. That's how it had always been. Ambassador Zalura of the Takari, a race known for their obsession with strength and dominance, was particularly vocal about humanity's position in the Federation. Humans, she often sneered during council meetings, are nothing more than idealistic dreamers. They have forgotten the necessity of force. Their history may be full of conflict, but they are far removed from it now. The council chambers were filled with species who nodded in agreement. The humans were ideal for trade agreements and neutral diplomacy, but when it came to true power, they didn't belong at the table of warriors. The galactic powers, races like the Takari, the Ragnaraks, and the brutal Valexians, were the ones who handled security and war. The humans, it seemed, were content to let others shoulder the burden of conflict. Perhaps it's better that way, said Yudrun, a Valexian general whose people were famous for their brutal methods in warfare. Humans aren't built for battle. Their society has grown too comfortable. They are incapable of the necessary violence that sustains dominance in this galaxy. Behind closed doors, discussions about the humans were more candid. They were tolerated, sometimes admired for their resourcefulness and technological contributions, but never feared. Why would they be? The humans had made themselves clear. They preferred diplomacy to bloodshed, innovation to conquest. And for most of the galaxy, that was fine. The humans were useful, and that's all they needed to be. Still, not everyone shared this view. There were a few voices, whispers really, within the Federation who had taken a deeper look into humanity's history. The more scholarly members of the Federation had studied ancient Earth, discovering the humans' long, bloody history of war. From tribal conflicts to world wars, their species had known violence intimately. For thousands of years, humans had fought, killed, and conquered with a brutality that rivaled even the most hardened races of the galaxy. But now they were different. Changed. They've forgotten, Zalura had said, laughing dismissively. Whatever they were in the past, they've moved beyond it. They think themselves above war now, and that makes them weak. But even as she spoke, there were those who wondered if that was truly the case. Humanity had not been involved in any significant galactic conflicts in centuries. They had avoided entanglements, steering clear of war and territorial disputes. Some said it was because they feared losing. Others believed it was because they had grown too soft to engage in warfare. But there were others, silent, cautious voices, who suggested a different theory. Perhaps humanity was not afraid of war, but rather, afraid of what they might become if they allowed themselves to engage in it again. Far from the council chambers, in the dark reaches of space, a new threat was brewing. The Zothian Dominion, a race of conquerors known for their viciousness and hunger for expansion, had been growing bolder. They had tested the Federation's defenses, attacking minor species on the outer rim, but so far, the Council had not acted with decisive force. It was as if they were waiting for the Zothians to strike somewhere significant before they considered a response. And then, the Zothians found their target, a human colony on the edge of Federation space. It wasn't the largest colony, nor the most important, but it was vulnerable. Isolated. Easy prey. When the Zothians attacked, they didn't just launch a strategic strike, they unleashed a brutal massacre. Entire settlements were wiped out, men, women, and children slaughtered without mercy. The Zothians left nothing standing, sending a clear message to the rest of the galaxy. The footage of the attack spread quickly, reaching the Federation Council within hours. And with it came the realization that this was more than just a raid. This was a declaration of war. The Federation Council met in an emergency session, discussing possible responses, but for the humans, there was no need for deliberation. Within hours of receiving news of the attack, Earth's response was immediate and absolute. "We will handle this ourselves," the human ambassador said coldly, standing before the council. Gone was the warmth and politeness they had come to expect from humanity's representatives. There was no request for assistance, no plea for support. Just a simple declaration: humanity would take matters into their own hands. The other council members were taken aback. The humans had never reacted this way before. They had always been cooperative, always eager to work with the Federation in resolving disputes. But now they were different. Their diplomats had fallen silent, their leaders no longer engaging in the usual debates. Earth began to mobilize. Human fleets, which had been seen as modest, suddenly emerged in force. Massive warships, unlike anything the Federation had ever seen, moved into position. Entire battalions of soldiers began preparing for deployment. The humans had been holding back, and now they were revealing the extent of their military capabilities no one had known existed. The galaxy watched in stunned silence as humanity shifted from quiet diplomacy to cold, calculated war preparation. And with it came an unsettling realization: the humans had never been weak. They had never been incapable of violence. They had simply chosen not to unleash it. But now, they had been provoked. And when humanity was provoked, something ancient and terrifying awoke within them. For the first time in centuries, the galaxy remembered what the scholars had tried to warn them about. Humanity was not soft. They were not weak. They were a species forged in fire, tempered by war, and trained by centuries of conflict. They had chosen peace, but peace was not their nature. The Federation Council, once dismissive of humanity's military capabilities, now watched in silent dread as the humans prepared for war. And they knew, with a growing sense of fear, that the Zothians had made a grave mistake. Humanity's patience had been mistaken for weakness. But now, the galaxy would learn the truth. Humans were not peaceful because they lacked the capacity for war. They were peaceful because they chose to be. And now, that choice had been taken from them. The Zothian ships descended on the human colony with brutal efficiency, cutting through its meager defenses as though they were nothing more than paper. The orbital bombardment came first, striking the settlements with terrifying precision, leaving smoking craters where buildings and homes had once stood. Then came the ground forces, wave after wave of heavily armed Zothian warriors, towering over the remaining human defenders, their reptilian forms imposing and merciless. It wasn't a battle. It was a slaughter. The Zothians swept through the colony, tearing apart anything and anyone in their path. The humans fought back, of course, they always did, but their defenses were pitiful against the sheer overwhelming force of the Zothian attack. The local militia, equipped with basic weapons, was no match for the elite Zothian soldiers, who moved with calculated ruthlessness. In hours it was over. What was once a bustling colony was reduced to ashes, its people gone, their screams lost in the wind. The Zothian commander, General Krax, stood in the center of the ruined settlement, surveying the devastation with satisfaction. The mission had been successful, another human colony wiped from the galaxy, another message sent. The Zothians had long despised the Federation, and humanity's colonies were an easy target, vulnerable and ripe for destruction. "Transmit the footage," Krax ordered, his voice cold and guttural. His command was quickly obeyed, and the scenes of devastation were broadcast throughout the galaxy. It was a message not just to the Federation, but to humanity itself: you are weak, you are prey, and we are the hunters. For the Zothians, this was how they solidified their dominance. Conquer, destroy, intimidate. And they believed humanity, like so many other species before them, would crumble under the weight of fear and overwhelming violence. Krax returned to his flagship, confident that the humans would be too shaken to mount any meaningful resistance. But what Krax didn't know, what the Zothians hadn't anticipated, was how wrong they were. Humanity wasn't afraid. Humanity was angry. The footage of the colony's destruction spread quickly, not just within the Federation but back to Earth itself. It was broadcast on every screen, every channel, and within moments, the collective mood of the human race shifted. Anger simmered beneath the surface, growing into something cold and focused. There was no outcry for vengeance, no wild calls for retaliation. Instead, there was something far more dangerous: resolve. On Earth, in command centers deep beneath the surface, military leaders convened. Their expressions were hard, their discussions brief. There was no need for lengthy debate or careful diplomacy. The time for that had passed. The Zothians had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Now, there was only one course of action. "We've kept our true strength hidden for long enough," General Harris said, his voice steady and calm as he addressed the gathered military commanders. "The Federation thinks they know us, but they don't. The Zothians think they can strike at us without consequence. They're wrong." Across the room, nods of agreement followed. The Zothians had made a fatal mistake. They had assumed that humanity's restraint was a sign of weakness. They had looked at Earth's contributions to the Federation and seen only diplomacy, science, and trade. They had never seen the other side of humanity, the side that had fought its way through millennia of wars, that had survived conflicts so brutal they had reshaped the very fabric of human society. "Activate the fleets," Harris ordered. "All of them. The fleets." For centuries, Earth had maintained a secret. Its true military might had never been fully revealed, not even to the Federation. The warships that patrolled the galaxy, the soldiers that participated in joint peacekeeping operations, those were only a fraction of humanity's power. Earth had long ago prepared for the possibility of galactic conflict, even if the rest of the galaxy never knew it. The real fleets, hidden in deep space stations and secret orbital shipyards, were about to be unleashed. Within hours, massive human warships began to mobilize. These weren't the lightly armed cruisers the Federation was used to seeing. These were ships of war, bristling with advanced weapons, armor plating that could withstand even the heaviest bombardments, and engines that made them faster than anything else in the galaxy. The humans had spent centuries perfecting their military technology, ensuring that when the time came, they would be ready for anything. And now that time had come. The Zothians, still reveling in their victory over the human colony, had no idea what was coming for them. Their forces were spread thin across the galaxy, their arrogance blinding them to the possibility that humanity would retaliate with anything more than words. But while they celebrated, the human fleets jumped into hyperspace, moving with terrifying speed toward Zothian-held territories. On board one of the command ships, Admiral Kane stood before a tactical display, watching as his fleets moved into position. His face was expressionless, his demeanor calm, but there was a fire in his eyes that spoke volumes. "The Zothians wanted a war," he said quietly to his officers. "We'll give them one." The human fleet arrived in Zothian space without warning. Their ships dropped out of hyperspace directly above a heavily fortified Zothian world, one of their core planets. There was no diplomatic message, no warning shots. The humans had made their decision. As soon as the fleet was in position, they opened fire. The first wave of attacks was devastating. Human warships unleashed concentrated barrages of kinetic and energy-based weapons, punching through Zothian defenses with brutal efficiency. Their planetary shields crumbled under the assault, and within minutes, entire cities were reduced to rubble. The Zothians, so used to being the aggressors, scrambled to respond, but their forces were too slow. Their fleets, spread thin across the galaxy, couldn't mobilize fast enough to counter the human attack. On the ground, Zothian generals shouted orders, trying to organize their defenses, but it was futile. The humans had arrived with overwhelming force, and there was no stopping them. For the first time in generations, the Zothians were the ones running in fear. In the command center of his flagship, Admiral Kane watched the destruction unfold on the tactical display. The Zothian resistance was faltering, just as expected. They had never been prepared for a direct assault of this magnitude, and now they were paying the price. Kane's expression remained cold, focused. There was no satisfaction in this, only the grim reality of what had to be done. "The Zothians wanted to make an example of us," Kane said to his officers. "Now we'll show them what happens when you provoke humanity." The fleet continued its bombardment, moving methodically from one target to the next, wiping out Zothian military installations, shipyards, and command centers. There would be no escape for the Zothian leadership. Every corner of their empire would feel the weight of humanity's wrath. The galaxy watched in stunned silence as news of the human counterattack spread. The Federation Council, once so dismissive of humanity's military potential, was now gripped by a deep unease. This was not the humanity they had known. This was something different, something terrifying. They had never realized just how dangerous humans could be when pushed too far. By the end of the first day, the Zothian homeworlds were in ruins. Their fleets decimated. Their leaders dead or in hiding. The Zothian Dominion, once a proud and unstoppable force, had been shattered. And it had taken less than 24 hours. Back on Earth, General Harris stood in a war room, watching the reports come in. The message had been sent. Humanity was not to be underestimated. The Zothians had learned that lesson the hard way, and the rest of the galaxy would never forget it. "We were content with peace," Harris said softly, more to himself than anyone else. "But if war is what they want, then war is what they'll get." And now, the galaxy knew the truth. Humans were not weak. They were not passive. They were gods of war, and once awakened, there was no force in the universe that could stand against them. The Zothians never imagined what hit them. The human retaliation had been swift and unrelenting, with each strike calculated for maximum effect. Entire Zothian strongholds had been obliterated before they had time to react, and now the heart of their empire was unraveling at a pace they couldn't comprehend. The Federation, watching from the sidelines, could barely process what was happening. Humanity, long considered a minor power, had just dismantled one of the most feared military forces in the galaxy within days. But this wasn't a conventional war. It wasn't a prolonged struggle of attrition, diplomacy, or negotiation. It was extermination, clean, efficient, and terrifying. The Zothian military, despite its bravado, had begun to crumble. Their once unshakable confidence had turned to panic as human fleets ravaged their territory. The Zothian leadership, hidden away in fortified bunkers on their remaining core worlds, tried to rally their forces, but the damage had already been done. They were losing control, and worse, they knew it. General Krax, the architect of the initial human colony massacre, had retreated to his command ship. His mind was racing, trying to comprehend the scale of the disaster unfolding before him. His forces had been trained for warfare, conditioned to be ruthless conquerors. But they had never encountered anything like this. The humans weren't just fighting back. They were dominating the battlefield with an aggression and precision that left no room for counterattacks. "Prepare the remaining fleets," Krax barked at his officers. "We'll regroup at Sector 9. We need to reinforce our defensive positions." But even as the words left his mouth, Krax knew it was a lie. There was no regrouping. The humans had already anticipated every move he could make. Every stronghold he fell back to was hit within hours, their defenses torn apart by human forces before the Zothians could even mount a proper counteroffensive. On the battlefield, human soldiers moved like shadows. These weren't the militia forces that had been slaughtered during the initial Zothian attack. These were highly trained warriors, specialized forces that had been held back, kept secret, until humanity deemed the moment right. And now, they had been unleashed. The Zothians were no strangers to war. They had conquered countless worlds and subjugated many species. But they had never faced anything like this. The humans didn't fight with rage or desperation, they fought with cold, calculated efficiency. Every human strike was precise, every movement part of a larger strategy that was unfolding with terrifying speed. On a Zothian-occupied world, human forces landed in droves. Their armored figures marched through the debris of what was once a proud Zothian military outpost, methodically clearing out any remaining opposition. Human war machines, sleek and deadly, rolled through the streets, their cannons firing with pinpoint accuracy, leaving no room for resistance. The Zothian soldiers who had been stationed there barely had time to react before they were overwhelmed. Plasma fire lit up the air, but the human soldiers moved with a discipline that shattered any illusions of a fair fight. They were faster, stronger, and more technologically advanced than the Zothians had anticipated. It wasn't just a fight for survival anymore, it was a rout. "Fall back!" a Zothian commander shouted, but his voice was drowned out by the chaos around him. His forces were being torn apart, not by overwhelming numbers, but by superior tactics and weaponry. The humans seemed to know their every move before they made it, outmaneuvering the Zothians at every turn. In the command center of the human forces, Colonel Arden watched the battlefield from a holographic display, his expression unreadable. His troops were executing the battle plan with surgical precision, just as they had trained for. The Zothians had never expected a species like humanity to have such advanced military capabilities. But that was their mistake, underestimating a race that had known war far longer than they realized. "They're breaking," Arden said calmly, observing the chaos from afar. "Just like we knew they would." The Zothians, for all their pride and bluster, had never faced an enemy that could adapt so quickly to their tactics. Human soldiers moved through the battlefield like predators, picking off Zothian stragglers with ruthless efficiency. The Zothian soldiers, once feared throughout the galaxy, now ran in terror. And it wasn't just their forces that were faltering. The Zothian leadership, scrambling to maintain control, found themselves in disarray. Their communications were being jammed, their supply lines severed, and every attempt at regrouping was met with overwhelming human firepower. They had started this war with arrogance, believing humanity would be an easy target. But now, they were seeing the truth. Humanity wasn't a weak, pacifist race. They were something far worse, an ancient war machine that had been dormant for too long. Back on Earth, in the war rooms beneath the surface, the human leadership remained calm. The strategy had always been clear. Humanity had never wanted this war, but once provoked, they had no intention of losing. They had spent centuries preparing, knowing that one day, the galaxy might push them too far. And that day had come. The Zothians had poked a sleeping giant, and now they were facing the consequences. Across the galaxy, the news of humanity's sudden rise to power spread like wildfire. Alien species who had once laughed at the idea of humans being a military force now watched in stunned silence as human fleets dominated the battlefield. The Federation Council, still reeling from the sheer speed of the human counteroffensive, convened in an emergency session. Ambassador Zalura, who had once dismissed humanity as soft, now sat in silence, her reptilian eyes narrowing as she watched the reports. She, like so many others, had been wrong. Terribly wrong. "What are they?" a council member from the Gernax species whispered, his voice shaking with disbelief. "How did we not see this coming? They've always been like this," Zalura replied, her voice quiet but steady. "We just never pushed them far enough to see it." The truth was plain for all to see now. Humanity, for all its diplomacy and cooperation, was a race forged in war. They had simply chosen not to show it. But now that choice had been taken away. Now, the galaxy was seeing what happened when humans were forced into conflict. And it was terrifying. On the Zothian homeworld, Krax stood in his command center, his eyes wide with disbelief as the reports continued to flood in. Every defensive line, every stronghold, was falling. His forces were being crushed, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. "We underestimated them," Krax muttered, his voice barely audible. "We thought they were weak. We were wrong." The humans had shattered the Zothian military's confidence, and now the Zothians were fleeing in every direction, trying to escape the onslaught. But there was nowhere left to run. Humanity was closing in, and they weren't stopping until the Zothian dominion was nothing more than a memory. In a matter of days, the Zothians' empire had crumbled, and the galaxy was left in stunned silence. The humans